The knock came at 5:03 a.m. Not a neighbor's knock. Not a lost delivery knock. Not the soft apologetic kind people use when they know they are dragging you into a bad morning. This one was official. 3 hard hits against the wood. I was halfway down the stairs before I was fully awake, pulling my robe tighter, barefoot on cold oak, the security light from the porch cutting a white rectangle across the foyer floor. When I opened the door, a man in a dark county windbreaker stood there holding a thick packet and a clipboard. Behind him, across the street, my parents were standing in their robes at the edge of my driveway, watching. My mother lifted one hand and called, "You should have done what family asked." My father didn't wave. He just stood there beside her, hands in his pockets, and said, "Pack. This happens today," for 1 second, and I honestly thought I was still half asleep. Then the man on my porch said, "Miss Sloane Avery." I nodded. "You've been served." He handed me the packet. At the top in thick black print were the words "Foreclosure Notice." My name was printed there like I was some stranger in my own home. Not Sloane who bought the property. Not Sloane who paid the taxes, the insurance, the roofers, the furnace tech, the stonemason, the landscaper, and the county. Every single year without a single missed payment, just the defendant. I looked down fast. Property address mine. Parcel number mine. And under plaintiff, something corporate enough to sound legitimate before sunrise. Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings LLC. I didn't yell. That was the part that threw my parents. They were ready for panic, for shouting across the drive, on for me to sound unstable while they stood there in matching robes, pretending they were just sad this had become necessary. Instead, I asked the man holding the papers one question. Who exactly claims to own the note? He glanced down at the first page, read the top line, then went quiet. Not for long, just long enough to make it matter. Then he looked back over his shoulder at my father. That was the first moment something in the morning changed, because this wasn't just some bank action that had arrived with terrible timing. My father knew something about the name on that page. I looked past the process server straight at him. He looked away first. That told me more than the packet did. The house sat on the north ridge above Bell Hollow. Stone foundation, green shutters, wide porch, old pear tree out back. Nor do I bought it 3 years earlier after selling my half of a software company and moving back to a town I once swore I would never return to. The place needed everything when I found it. New plumbing, rewiring, drainage correction, a roof the color of old bruises, and windows that leaked when the wind turned. I still bought it. Because the bones were good. Because the land was mine once the check cleared. Because I liked building something solid in a place where my family still thought of me as the daughter who left and got ideas. My parents lived across the street because my grandfather had split the ridge lots years ago. That had seemed charming when I first came back. Then my sister got divorced. Then my mother started saying things like, "You've got all that space." Then my father started using words like practical. Then my sister Delia started calling the guest room my side every time she visited. 3 weeks ago, my mother stood in my kitchen and said very plainly, "Your sister needs this property more than you do." I laughed in her face. That apparently had consequences. Now I stood in my own doorway holding foreclosure papers while they watched from across the road like spectators at a fire they had set themselves. I flipped to the attachment pages. There it was. An alleged security instrument, a private deed of trust supposedly executed 11 months earlier. Borrower, Sloane Avery, lender, Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings, LLC. Default amount claimed, $412,000. I almost laughed again. Not because it was funny, because it was stupid. I had no mortgage, no second lien, no family loan, no bridge financing, nothing. Then the house was paid for in full at closing. I knew because I still had the wire confirmation and the owner's title policy in my office safe upstairs. The process server cleared his throat once. I held up the page. "I never signed this." He looked uncomfortable now, not guilty, just aware he had stepped into something uglier than a normal service call. Across the street, my mother called, "You should have listened when we gave you the easy way." The easy way. That was how she framed surrender. I stepped out onto the porch. "Did you file this?" I asked my father. He smiled then. "Small, controlled, terrible. You'll hear all about it in court." That was answer enough. I looked back at the process server. "Can you read the plaintiff contact line out loud?" He looked down again, read it, and this time he didn't just go quiet. When he frowned, then he turned the first page toward me and said carefully, "The contact for the plaintiff is Richard Avery. Same address as the house across from yours." My father stopped smiling because the process server had just said the quiet part out loud. The plaintiff contact on the foreclosure notice was my father's address, not a bank tower, not a servicing company in another state, not some faceless lender, the house across the street. I looked back at the man holding the papers. Does this case number belong to a real foreclosure filing? He glanced down again, then nodded. Yes, judicial filing, county docket opened yesterday afternoon. So, it wasn't fake. That was worse because fake paper can be thrown away. Real paper has to be killed properly. I stepped back into my foyer, shut the door halfway against the morning cold on and spread the packet on the hall table. My parents stayed where they were, across the street, watching, probably expecting panic. They got procedure instead. I opened the second page. There it was. An alleged promissory note for $412,000 secured by a deed of trust on my house. Borrower, me. Lender, Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings, LLC. Default date, 61 days earlier. Trustee substitution filed 9 days ago. Sale authority requested through the court. Every line was neat. Every line was impossible. I bought the house with cash at closing. No mortgage, no bridge note, no family loan, nothing. The owner's title, policy, and closing wire confirmation were upstairs in my safe. I went and got them. When I came back down, the process server was still on the porch. Awkward now. What caught between finishing his morning and realizing he had just walked a forged debt into the wrong doorway. I called the number on my title policy first. Emergency claims. A woman named Mara picked up, asked for the parcel address, then went quiet the second I said the words judicial foreclosure. Stay on the line, she said. Keyboard sounds. Then, Miss Avery, our original file shows fee, simple title vested in you at closing. Free and clear except standard taxes and utility easements. There was no purchase money mortgage. I know. I'm now seeing a later recorded deed of trust. I never signed one. Another pause. Then her tone changed completely. Do not say anything else to the other side. I'm bringing title counsel in. My father had crossed halfway down the street by then, and he stopped at the curb when he saw me holding the policy and the foreclosure packet side by side. That interested me because it meant he knew exactly what those papers did to his story. A man came onto the line. Elliot Crane Claims Counsel. Miss Avery, I need 3 things quickly. Did you ever borrow against this house? Did you ever sign a note to Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings? Did you ever authorize Richard Avery to sign any debt or property document for you? No. 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 He exhaled once. Good. Good. That was the second time in 10 minutes a professional had used that word about a disaster in progress, and it told me the same thing both times. The disaster was no longer mine alone. Elliot kept talking. The deed of trust was recorded 11 months ago. The acknowledgement shows you appeared before a notary in Brookhaven County on October 9th. Were you there? I knew the date immediately. No, I was in Phoenix speaking at a conference. I still have the hotel folio. Excellent, he said. Excellent. Across the street, my mother had stopped calling anything. Now she was just staring. Elliot opened something else in the record. Then his voice sharpened. There's more. The trustee substitution and notice of default were both filed by counsel for Cedar Ridge yesterday morning. But Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings itself was formed only 13 days before the deed of trust was recorded. I looked at my father. He looked away first. That told me enough. They hadn't found some old hidden debt. They had built one. I asked, who formed the LLC? Elliot didn't answer right away. When he did, and his voice was colder, the organizer listed on the formation papers as Richard Avery, my father. Of course, he had created the lender, created the note, created the lien, then created the foreclosure. I should have been shocked. Instead, I felt the whole thing simplify because now it wasn't a messy family property dispute. It was a sequence. Fake lender, fake note, fake deed of trust, real foreclosure filing. And my parents standing in robes across the street expecting me to pack before sunrise. Elliot said, I'm pulling one more linked filing. Then he went quiet. Not the polite quiet from before, longer, worse. What is it? I asked. When he answered, even the process server on my porch went still. There's a prepared conveyance deed attached in the foreclosure counsel's upload, he said. Postdale grantee is already named. My stomach tightened. Who? He paused, then said, your sister, Delia Avery. My sister, of course, not my father, not my mother, not the fake lender LLC in the complaint header. Delia was the clean ending, the the softer face, the daughter they thought would make the whole thing look like a family correction instead of a theft. I stood in my foyer holding the title policy in one hand and the foreclosure packet in the other while my parents watched from across the street like spectators at a fire they had already priced out. Elliot Crane came back on the line. "Miss Avery, I'm sending emergency counsel now, but I need you to understand what happened. This was not just a bad filing. Someone created a false lender, recorded a false deed of trust, and then used that false lien to open a real foreclosure case." I looked at my father. He still would not meet my eyes. Across the street, my mother called. "This would have been easier if you'd agreed to help your sister." There it was. Not debt collection, not some hidden obligation, not an old note coming back to life. They did all this because I had refused 3 months earlier to sign the house over temporarily so Delia could use it as collateral for a restaurant buy-in with the man she was dating that month. I said no. They built a foreclosure. The process server shifted awkwardly on my porch. He had finished his job, but he wasn't leaving now. Not after hearing the plaintiff's address, the fake LLC, and the title counsel on speaker. I flipped through the packet again. The signatures were wrong. The notary county was wrong. See, the lender was fake, but the case number was real. That was the ugly genius of it. My father hadn't forged a scary letter and hoped I'd panic. He had built just enough paperwork to get a real case into the system. Elliot's voice sharpened. I found one more filing. 5 days ago, Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings recorded an assignment of bitter rights after sale. Post-sale recipient is Delia Avery. There was the whole latter now, laid out cleanly. Fake lender, fake note, fake deed of trust, real foreclosure case, future transfer to my sister. My mother started walking across the street then, robe flapping around her calves. My father stayed where he was. My mother always moved first when charm still had a chance. "Sloan," she said, climbing the porch steps. "You know how hard things have been for Delia." "No," I said, "I know how hard you were willing to make things for me." She looked genuinely insulted. "As if we'd put you out on the street." I held up the first page. "You had me served at dawn. That was just process." No, that was the sentence. That was the one that finished her because it made the whole thing sound normal in her own mouth. Just process. As if process had somehow walked itself into a fake lender, a forged lien, and a foreclosure sale path ending in my sister's name. Elliot must have heard her because his voice came back colder. "Miss Avery, do not let them take any originals. Sheriff Civil Desk and Foreclosure Clerk are both being contacted now. We are filing an emergency motion to stay and expunge." Also on the title file shows the same notary stamp appeared on a disputed deed transfer 2 months ago. My father finally looked up. That told me everything. Not shock, recognition. He knew that seal too. The process server heard it. He took one step off the porch and said almost apologetically, "I think I need to note this service back with a clerk." "Please do," I said. Then I called the foreclosure clerk's office myself. A woman named Brenda answered, sleepy-voiced at first until I gave her the case number, parcel address, and the phrase false lender deed of trust. She stopped typing. Then, "Mevery, stay where you are. I'm putting a temporary review hold note on the file pending counsel contact." My father crossed the street then fast. Too fast. "For God's sake," he snapped. "You're blowing this up." I almost laughed because that was the best part. In his mind, I was the one enlarging it, not the man who created a company, forged a loan, recorded a lien, and filed foreclosure papers on his own daughter before sunrise. "You filed a foreclosure on a paid-off house," I said. "What size did you want?" The porch went quiet. Even my mother didn't try to answer that. By 6:12 a.m., everything had turned. The foreclosure clerk had flagged the case for emergency review. Title counsel had sent written notice to the trustee in the court. The process server had logged the plaintiff address irregularity, and my father, who had started the morning telling me to pack, was now standing on my porch listening to people in real offices say words like expunge, fraud, chain defect, and criminal referral. That was the moment he finally tried the truth, or something close to it. "We only needed leverage," he said. "Not money, not fairness, leverage for Dia, for family, for whatever demand they thought I would eventually meet once the right amount of pressure sat on my chest." My mother closed her eyes when he said it because leverage is the word you use when you know exactly what you did. I looked at him and said, "You mean extortion with letterhead?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. By noon, my attorney had the stay motion filed. The foreclosure clerk had marked the case under fraud challenge, and Cedar Ridge Recovery Holdings had gone from lender to evidence. The deed of trust was eventually voided. The foreclosure complaint was dismissed. The notary journal did not save the notary. My father's LLC did not survive the investigation. Delia never got within reach of the house. And my mother never again used the phrase "just process" where any one official could hear it. As for me, I did 3 things. I changed the locks. I reissued the title policy endorsements. And I had a fraud alert placed on the parcel, so no instrument touching that house would ever move again without my direct in-person confirmation. That was the real ending, not keeping the house, protecting it from my own blood. A process server knocked at 5 a.m. with a foreclosure notice, and my parents stood across the street waiting to watch me break. Instead, the man holding the papers read the top line, went quiet, and looked back at my father. Because even before sunrise, the fraud had already started telling on itself. If you made it this far, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own father had a foreclosure notice served on your paid-off home before dawn? And which moment hit harder for you? The fake lender at his address, the deed to your sister after sale, or his admission that he only needed leverage? If you like the story, leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next.